Now, there's data that shows that the slower job growth during the recovery has left communities of color in a deep economic hole. African Americans enjoy fewer job opportunities than other groups. African Americans and Latinos earn less than others. African Americans and Latinos swell the ranks of the minimum wage earners. And just in case you all don't know, I sit on the Joint Economic Committee, and one of the things that we've noticed is that the less education a person has, the more negatively the recession affects them. I don't care what color you are. It affects African Americans more and Hispanics more, but that education is key. Household incomes have fallen drastically for African Americans since the recession. Poverty rates are already much higher in communities of color, rose faster in the recession and have recovered more slowly than for whites. The wealth gap between communities of color and whites widened sharply due to housing market weaknesses. The median non-white or Latino household had $23,300 in wealth in 2009, less than 1/6 of the wealth of white non-Latino households, which had $149,000 in wealth. It is hardly surprising, therefore, that under the Great Recession, home ownership disappeared fastest for African Americans during the recession and recovery. By the end of 2011, 45.1% of African Americans owned their homes, and 46.6% of Latinos owned their homes, compared to a home ownership rate of 73.7% for whites. Today, communities of color are at higher risk than whites of losing their homes to foreclosure. In 2011, the foreclosure rate for African Americans was 9.8%, for Latinos it was 11.9%, and for Asians it was 6.6%, while the foreclosure rate for whites was 5%. Speaking as an African American, I think that we could go a long way towards addressing these challenges if the economy were getting better in our communities. However, that simply is not the case. African American economic fortunes continued to decline in 2011. This is why the analysts at the Center for American Progress concluded, my friends, that it is more important for policymakers to undertake serious efforts to close the economic opportunity gaps between communities of color and whites, and to address in a substantive way the lagging experience of African Americans. Now, the first steps towards recovery are some things that we need to do. I agree that more needs to be done, both in the African American communities and generally. Still, I do not minimize the difficulties inherent in fashioning a rational, fair housing policy in our current political climate. We've seen those political differences play out in the struggles over the minimum wage, labor organizing, access to health care, and disparities in educational opportunities. Let me give you a footnote with regard to labor. As a ranking member on the Government Reform Committee, I can tell you that 7 out of every 10 hearings that we hold are attacks on unions and trying to destroy them. It would be naive indeed to expect our national housing policies to be exempt from these fundamentally different viewpoints about our national future. However, I firmly believe that we cannot fully renew our nation's economic growth until families see their home values stabilize and eventually recover. That is why, as the ranking member, I've made addressing foreclosure and the crisis it has created my #1 priority. In particular, I pursued 2 key issues to stabilize the housing market. First, the mortgage servicing industry has to stop abusing homeowners. That's exactly what they're doing. When I became ranking member, I launched an investigation into the abuses by the mortgage servicing industry, as well as the law firms that process foreclosure. Further, I commend the President for his administration's leadership on the 49-state settlement. I know some of you all may not agree with it, but I think it's best that it be done at the moment. And I hope that as a result of our collective efforts, we will have a mortgage servicing industry that complies with the law. Second, I believe that we need to provide meaningful aid to the 11 million borrowers who are underwater. That is why last fall I spearheaded efforts to hold meetings between federal regulators and members of Congress to discuss how to implement President Obama's proposal to expand refinancing opportunities for borrowers who were current on their mortgages but unable to refinance at today's low interest rates because they were underwater. I was pleased by the changes that were made to the Home Affordable Refinance Program, and I'm pleased by the reports that the changes have enabled more borrowers to obtain lower interest rates. Second, I've worked with my Democratic colleagues to allow the expanded use of principal reductions as a way to not only help borrowers reclaim equity in their homes, but also to prevent taxpayer losses, both. Mark Zandi, chief economist of Moody's Analytics, has stated that the housing crisis is ground zero for the economy's problems, lost jobs and high unemployment, and that targeted principal reduction of underwater mortgages provides the best odds of ending the housing crash quickly and definitely. All of the major banks do some form of principal reduction for mortgages they own. And under the $25 billion settlement with the 49 states, they have agreed to do additional principal reduction. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, the president of the New York Fed, and even the former Special Inspector General, Fatah, have all called for principal reduction as the best way to end the housing crisis, help homeowners, and save taxpayers money. Unfortunately, a significant portion of homeowners do not have access to this form of aid because their mortgages are owned by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Their regulator, Mr. Ed DeMarco, who is the acting director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, has refused to allow Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to offer principal reduction, even in cases in which it would save money compared to foreclosure or to other types of modifications. I've joined with my colleagues in the Congress in asking Mr. DeMarco to explain and justify his blanket opposition to principal reduction. In response, Mr. DeMarco has asserted that principal reduction is, and I quote, not going to be the least cost approach for the taxpayer, end of quote. However, by terms of his own data, which he finally provided to the Oversight Committee in January, it appears that just the opposite is true. Principal reductions save more money than any other type of modification, including principal forbearance, particularly for Fannie Mae. In fact, just yesterday, this is hot off the press, just yesterday, Congressman John Tierney of Massachusetts and I sent a letter to Mr. DeMarco. Our letter described a host of internal Fannie Mae documents that we obtained that show that Fannie Mae officials concluded years ago that principal reduction has enormous potential to save the United States taxpayers significant amounts of money by avoiding losses that result from default and foreclosure. And by the way, that's Mr. DeMarco's mandate. That is what Congress directed him to do. If principal reduction will save the taxpayer money, he should be doing it now. For that reason, it is my view that FHFA should authorize Fannie Mae to offer principal reductions as soon as possible. However, there's another reason why I believe Mr. DeMarco has a duty and an obligation to allow the use of principal reduction. I question whether we can succeed in stabilizing our national housing market without this additional initiative. I will leave the rest of the tall grass of housing policy for the experts. My critical takeaway point is that our housing crisis is not going to solve itself automatically. At least it will not be solved without an unacceptable level of social and economic pain. What we can and should do is adopt an all of the above strategy, doing everything in our power to get the job done. Ladies and gentlemen, when I speak of the national housing crisis, I'm mindful that foreclosures at the level we have been experiencing devastate entire communities, as well as the families who are already involved. I speak from experience. I love in my own community. There are about 15 houses on each side of the block. And across the street from me, 6 of them are in some form of foreclosure. Our property values have gone down about 45% in the last few years. So even as we address the millions of American families whose economic fortunes and futures are in peril, we must begin the process of recapitalizing our communities. That is why, before I bring these remarks to a close, I want to applaud ARF for your leadership in creating the Homeowners Insurance Program that I have been informed will be extended to my hometown of Baltimore later this year. I really do appreciate that.